California independence, Cascadia to boot. Do 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 do. Talking about UBI today. Universal Basic Income. Huzzah! Huzzah! I know where my UBI money would go. To the mortgage. Whoop whoop whoop. Whoop whoop whoop. Whoop whoop whoop.
How you doing, Bill?
I'm doing well. Very eventful day yesterday. I got my COVID vaccine, so I'm a little droopy, although I'm feeling much better. This morning I woke up and felt like death. My arm is sore as can be. Didn't hurt going in. I actually didn't know the needle was in me when they injected it, but today, hurting like a bastard. Those are the two things that we're known
Hi guys, how are you? Is Bill rambling again?
It sure is.
Oh, that's great. That's super, pal. Awesome. Hey, listen, so Bill, like I said before, we're not doing the canceled Dick Tracy episode. We're doing the UBI episode, correct?
Yes.
Okay. So we're not talking about Dick Tracy, right? Even though you kept insisting on that.
You know, that's one of the first movies I remember going to as a kid. I loved that movie.
Actually,
First movie I ever saw was Back to the Future. I saw it with my dad because my dad was babysitting me and he didn't want to not watch Back to the Future. Okay. I went and saw that. I remember Who Framed Roger Rabbit, Dick Tracy, and Tim Burton's Batman. That's
actually my first three too. Back to the Future 2. I don't remember the first Back to the Future. But Back to the Future 2, I saw Dick Tracy, Batman, and Gremlins 2.
Directed by Joe Dante. Probably one of my favorite directors.
So again, we're not doing that, right?
Were you terrified though with like Who Framed Roger Rabbit? If you saw that as a kid, were you like terrified by that movie?
Yes, because of what the ending with Judge Dumas is like. Did he talk like this, Eddie? Did he talk like this? Yeah.
I will say one thing my parents did that was great is they let me see R-rated movies. Like I don't remember not seeing R-rated movies. Like I saw Alien and Aliens and Predator when I was like 7 years old.
Yeah, my parents are the same way too. It can be ultra violent. It's just nothing sexual.
Exactly.
Look at the damage. I mean, who says, it's only scarring for life.
Well, I mean, it's just like it's God intended, right? We can just watch people get obliterated, but the sexual intercourse thing that everyone does, yeah, we can't see that ever.
This is the difference of European cinema and American cinema, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
I'm not saying it's a good idea to show, both the kids, but I'm just saying it's just like, one thing's probably likely to happen, and then if you're ever in a situation where like aliens are hunting you for sport, that's probably not going to happen. So, and that's more traumatic. But again, this is, what are you going to do? Like have NC-17 movies, have kids watch Basic Instinct, best of both worlds?
I think it's affected my comedy more than violence because like when you see Animal House or Caddyshack or Porky's before you're 10 years old, like other things are just not going to be as funny. This is Last Exit on the Left, episode 3 technically, because I interviewed T from Decent Fed Project earlier this week, and we talked about automation, which kind of leads into our discussion on UBI or Universal Basic Income. So if you haven't seen that yet, please check it out. His view on automation is way more grim than mine, and I thought mine was really grim. I believed at the point that like plumbers and HVAC and electricians would still be safe because of like robots having to like maneuver in the back. And he's like, no. There's robots that could sense that now. They're coming down the lane. They're coming down. And yeah, those jobs are going to be done too. But podcasting, art, delivering, I guess drug dealer will be still a good job, I guess.
Well, yeah, that's a great one. I mean, that's again, that you can have a flourishing career in drugs, as we've seen over the years. The one thing with UBI, like I wouldn't even say the arts is 100% safe. I know we have this thing where it's like the human spirit will like, come through and be more creative than any robot. And I believe that's true. But, if you want to just like turn out like Fast and the Furious 18 or like, again, other kind of schlock crap, you could probably have a program that can think this and put this together. I think
Awesome it's from South Park.
Yeah, well, there was a thing, George Orwell's 1984, there was a little part, I think the girl he was trying to bang throughout the entire novel and actually did bang, she worked at like some kind of like prol feed or something like that, where it's like they had an automated program where it was kind of like, I don't know if they said it was a computer, but yeah, well, I guess it was. It was like something automated where they would basically be printing like trash novels and magazines for consumption by the masses. Like these are not unique works of art. These is all this like the equivalent of like pumping out soap operas, and they would produce that for again like the laboring masses below the party. And I could totally see that happen because there's certain things like you can just keep regurgitating over and over again. If you can get a program to do the hero's journey with like out of Joseph Campbell and just have that keep going over and over with like stock characters or like stock tropes.
I don't even think it needs to be stock. I mean, if you look at most of what the internet is today, it's just regurgitating.
I mean, it's like we got Ghostbusters, like Afterlife coming out. We have how many remakes at this point? I mean, by the way, I actually liked the movie a lot. Actually, I thought it was pretty funny. But Coming to America, I mean, like that's not exactly like breaking new ground. And that's like there's a multitude of those right now. So like you could have a computer replace like writers for that, and just be like, oh, okay, this will get like some good little like hints of a joke here.
Well, you can already, I mean, so there's already programs out, in beta. I think two different things people oftentimes get confused about the difference between automation and artificial intelligence. And I think automation and kind of like robots replacing physical jobs is one aspect of it, but artificial intelligence and replacing, like just the ability to basically do any type of intellectual work, design, it's already there. I mean, you can go test these programs out and they're all in beta or alpha or whatever, but they're incredible. And so like when you talk about writing copy, marketing, creating websites, creating artwork for websites, there's programs that within the next 5 years will be able to do that, at the same level or better than humans can.
From my personal experience, for those who watching don't know, I used to teach chess. So I'm an above average tournament chess player. And Alpha Zero is a chess program, an AI program that taught itself chess after 4 hours. And I think within 6 hours, it was better than any human living. In chess, we have ratings. So for instance, I think my rating is like 1570. A grandmaster is 2500. Magnus Carlsen, the world champion, is 2,800. Any program you get on your phone or computer, they process 200 million plus positions in a second. Their rating is about 3,200. I think 3,300, no, 3,200 is what's called the God rating. And the idea behind that term is they don't think a human mind would ever be capable of just doing that well in chess. We just don't have the computer for it. And this AI program, Alpha Zero, destroys all these best computers. I mean, just absolutely, the gap between that computer and the AI is bigger than the gap between me and Magnus Carlsen, the world chess champion. It's just, and it's doing things like breaking rules and like just coming up with different chess theories that have never really been considered. And I will say, the chess world has survived. I mean, people now use computers to study. I mean, it's given, even players at my level use computer engines to look at various positions and to look at different things. But it's really, it's inspired a lot of people. Just people are now playing different chess because of AI and some of the interesting concepts. So absolutely, like AI is real. And I've even seen some AI paintings that are pretty phenomenal. And yeah, deep fake, soon animation's going to look real, where, actors are going to be, good looking actors are going to be replaced by people with good voice acting work.
Well, I think
did they have something where like, oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead. I had one there.
I was just going to say, it's really interesting that I think the best, well, not the best, but, like the next evolution in film, you have with The Mandalorian, they've been employing all these different, I think with the video stages, and then you're able to get this really engrossing and immersive world. But now what they're exploring is that we're getting up to the level where computers have the power to do basically real-time digital animation, in virtually created worlds, but that are basically being simulated with live actors. And so where the computing power is great enough to actually be processing all that in real time. And so there is, it just increasingly, we're going towards this kind of virtual animated world where all of that is taken care of.
Yeah, I mean, it's a scary thought. It's I mean, what is it? There was one film that's supposed to be coming out, I think in the next like year or two, where it's like it's got they want to have a CGI James Dean in it, and basically it's supposed to be something I think on the Vietnam War, but they were going to be using the CGI James Dean. So like there's going to be a period of time where like the estates of some of these deceased famous actors and movie stars are probably going to start plugging them into movies and see what happens. I mean, like, I don't know if they can get the voice down like right away, but even so, they can plug it in with a good impersonator. I mean, Val Kilmer was actually in a film not that long ago. He has basically lost his voice due to throat cancer, I believe, and he had kind of an impersonator talk over for him. I forget what the film was called, but he was in something like that where that was already kind of like, something of interest. I forget what the film was called. It was something like he was rescuing someone's daughter or something like that, but he had someone like basically talk for him for the entire film.
Well, it's certainly going to open up a very broad swath of discussion around the rights to, your own likeness, to digital data, and all the rest. But Bill, Forbes, I'd be curious of both of your opinions on why does automation and AI have to do with universal basic income? And what is universal basic income? You want to give us like a basic rundown of what that is and why we're talking about it?
I think Bill's kind of more of the expert than me. I have a couple caveats. I believe in the idea, but Bill, you used to be with the Andrew Yang campaign, that was the central tenet.
Yeah, ironically, UBI, I was more of a negative income tax guy, and I still might be. And it actually wasn't even my favorite issue with Yang, but I had to learn it. They're like, hey, you got to learn the ins and outs of it. So universal basic income has been around since the Roman Empire. I might actually be the Republic. I'm not 100% on that. But a form of guaranteed income. There's been forms of guaranteed assets, like you get guaranteed food. I know there was a French philosopher in the 1700s who advocated for it. In America, Thomas Paine had a one-time stipend that he wanted to give to everyone. Martin Luther King supported it. Milton Friedman and Richard Nixon supported a negative income tax. And then, Yang is the most recent, and there's a lot of different UBIs. People assume that Andrew Yang's UBI ironically, it wasn't even Andrew Yang's. It's a guy named Andy Stearns, who is the former head of the SEIU union. It was his universal basic income idea, his plan that he took. So a UBI is basically a guaranteed amount of income that you're going to get during a certain period of time. Usually, most UBI plans, I would say 90% are monthly. I've seen a few that were bi-monthly. I've seen some that are yearly. Most people don't like the idea of yearly UBIs just because it doesn't help a person right away. So the idea right now of a negative income tax or a universal basic income is a couple things. One, I don't even want to say a safety net, but it's very psychological. People who have financial stress tend to make bad decisions. So the idea of a lot of the universal basic income is psychological. Someone knows they are going to get money. So no matter how desperate things are, they know that they are getting $1,000 or whatever X amount at the end of the month. There's another idea behind it, which is more conservative, which I actually agree with, being a progressive. It's to eliminate the waste in a lot of government programs. SNAP, TANF are incredibly wasteful. Like, I think something like less than 10% of the people who qualify for it actually get these programs. They're incredibly means tested. They can be taken away from you for any time, and they're temporary. So the idea eventually, a lot of people think with a universal basic income is that it will replace cash equivalent welfare programs. Not all programs, like you'll still have education programs or different things like that, but it's the idea that you'll save money in government waste. It's not means tested, and it also takes the stigma away from welfare, because if everybody is getting it, people don't feel like, oh, they're taking from me to give to this person. So it helps with the class divide. But and so I'll say this: there's a lot of the details in UBI, and there's a lot of different ones. The main one comes usually from how it's going to be collected, like how the tax revenue is going to be collected from it. That's one thing with the negative income tax, where it's like, for instance, the California National Party. You check out californianationalparty.com, check out our platform. Our universal basic income is only $500 a month. It's not the 1,000, but we combine that with a negative income tax. So your first $46,000 are not taxed. Then we take a formula of 40,000 minus what you make divided by 2 is what you would get in a negative income tax. So say you are me, a stay-at-home dad who does not make any money right now. You would take half of 40,000, or you would take 0 minus 40,000, you still have 40,000, divided by 2 is 20,000. I would receive $26,000 a year. I would not be able to get that would eliminate welfare for me. Although I don't have welfare now because, my wife makes money.
So what do you mean by welfare?
So like food stamps, most UBIs, there's some that want to keep food stamps and cash equivalents. Most do not, just because, and here's the other thing about universal basic income. If you're on welfare, there's not a lot of incentive to get off of it. And what I mean by that is if you're on welfare, the job you're probably going to get if you're jobless and on welfare is a minimum wage job. And it's probably going to be a job that could be easily be replaced. It's going to be high stress, not a lot of money. You can lose your benefits by making money. The idea with UBI is that if someone's making no money, they can get that basic guaranteed income and then still go get a job. So it still incentivizes work. In fact, the recent study that came out from Stockton, California had a UBI pilot. More people got jobs when they were on UBI. They were able, like the one guy, the anecdotal thing was this one guy was able to take a couple days off of work from his minimum wage job that didn't give paid vacation. And he was able to go apply for other jobs. Something he would not have been able to do if he did not have a universal basic income.
It sounded like, again, the study I read over what you said, it sounded like, again, it gave a lot of flexibility to people that would not have that. Because, again, if they're in the welfare system, yeah, you're going to be at a point where it's just like, God, if I get a crappy Mick job, doing meaningless work versus like my welfare benefits, and then the welfare is kind of like better, and then I'm kind of stuck in between a rock and like a slightly softer place. But yeah, it really causes like a real kind of like a problem where, again, like, okay, I don't want to actually like better myself too much because I really won't make that jump right away. I can't have long-term planning whatsoever.
Well, and another thing why I think universal basic income or negative income tax is so important, 70% of Americans cannot afford a $500, unexpected $500 expense. That is devastating. That is a lot of stress on people. And another argument I make, and this is, I use this to a lot of Republicans when I volunteered for the End campaign, we got a lot of Republicans and Democrats, but the idea of family values. You take away the 1950s and the racism and the isms and all the horrible, there was something about family values with the idea of a stay-at-home parent. Stay-at-home parent is good for a kid. Right now, the average family, like the parents work 2.5 jobs. Kid is unsupervised. They say educational benefits, 60% of them are not even in the classroom. It's your home environment. It's having a parent there. Like I help my daughter with her homework. I'm there to help her and make sure she gets it done. Kids who don't have the parent home don't have that family structure. So UBI does a lot of things that, like I said, alleviates mental health. They said in that Stockton study, it was the equivalent of giving people Prozac and how it relaxed people and took stress. It helps with family. The other thing it helps with is volunteerism. And people finding jobs they like. If you're getting an extra $12,000 a year, and say you make 40, but there's a job you really like that pays 30,000, you might be able to take that job now because you're getting that extra money. You're going to do something more meaningful. When I talk universal basic income to people, I always talk about all those stay-at-home parents are going to be able to have money where they can now go volunteer in the classroom. They can go volunteer for after-school programs. I always say the truck driver who's going to get displaced because of automation and AI, I would much rather them be Pop Warner football coaches or Little League coaches or Boy Scout leaders, and work with kids than being retrained for a meaningless, I'll say meaningless job that really has no, that could be done by a robot. So yeah, those are the things I think of when it comes to UBI.
You basically not to interrupt, but you're basically saying like it creates more of a sense of community after a while because you have the opportunities to do things that actually in the past we did have, like during the 1950s and 1960s up until like the mid 70s. One of the things I just would point out, the reason why we had that was because of World War II, when every other competitive economy in the against the United States was obliterated or not functional. Yeah, we could have all this, wealth and incredible means to actually have all this time off, but now this is not the thing that would happen.
You look like you're about to speak, Brandon.
Yeah, no, I was just curious. So I think you're touching on a really interesting point, which is, I think one of my big cautions around the idea of UBI is in our current system, there's so much complexity and really graft and corruption and other things that really take advantage and exploit people. And so I think it's really interesting that when I research or I look at things on universal basic income, it is being advanced both by progressive causes and also conservative causes that really see it as an opportunity to basically undercut social programs and probably take away more benefits than a cash UBI would give. And so I think, from a progressive angle of if we're having that conversation, finding ways that can do so, and you've also talked about like a net income tax, so that rather than having it be universal, it's actually based on wealth and access and living costs and living expenses, which I think is really good too. But I'd also just like to point out, I think it's really important that when we have these conversations that we do even watch ourselves for stigmatizing language and how we talk about. And I think even, I think just because a job is low income doesn't make it meaningless, or even how we talk about welfare, that the people on welfare might go into, it could be other things as well. So I think really watching ourselves and how we talk about it. But I'd be very interested to see also then, what do you two feel like would be most important in terms of like other programs that would go along with a UBI or a negative income tax that would be really important? So like single payer healthcare, would that be part of it? Other forms of housing, what other programs should go along with it to make sure that we're not just undercutting people by offering them monthly cash payments?
And that's a great.
Actually, I would. Oh, sorry.
No,
If
you
I
go.
could go first. Okay. Well, I mean, I have my biggest caveat when it comes to UBI. I believe in it strongly, but I feel that the moment there's a UBI program, there's going to be something where you're going to have landlords looking to scoop up that extra money, and that they'll raise rents constantly because they know they can kind of get away with that. Because if they figure out that everyone has 500 or 1,000 extra bucks a month, they will in the next the time your lease is up, they will try to scoop that up. I mean, again, they're very parasitic about that. So I think that UBI can only really work in a strong sense. I mean, universal healthcare is another thing too, but I think the most important thing is that making sure that the landlords can't just be stealing the income, and really have some kind of rent controls or some kind of program that limits the ability to raise rents, or again, I don't know if a rent subsidy program, or again, the whole housing situation when it comes to renters has to be addressed along with UBI. It has to be coupled. It cannot be decoupled, because again, the moment it is, I know, again, I used to work for a major REIT company, real estate investment trust. They own 120 properties up and down the West Coast, as large apartment communities, kind of I would say upper middle class to very rich communities. They were always raising rents constantly left and right, and they would just do that in a second to get away with it. Now they're restrained to a little bit by California law, but they'll keep increasing things constantly.
So I understand your logic. I will tell you, every study that has been done on house prices, it has not gone up. Alaska with theirs, every experiment, but it makes sense, your argument. I totally understand it, but it just doesn't happen. And one of the reasons is the amount of people who go from renters to homeowners. So the marketplace, people kind of move up. And the other thing that I wouldn't worry about it as much in California, especially, there are more houses than there are people, meaning that we have a surplus of houses. So there's a lot to it. But for the record, I agree that rent and housing is an issue. And as Andrew Yang even said, universal basic income in his plan was just the foundation. It was the bottom floor to build up from. So Medicare for all or single payer, whichever one, that's something that has to be added. I mean, Forbes and I have talked about housing should be a human right. That
Absolutely. I mean, that has to be,
that solves a
that's
lot
not
of problems.
negotiable in my mind either. That has to be taken care of. And I also don't want to have a society where, I'm looking at some of the statistics, for example, I think in Los Angeles, like the average income is like around like 52,000 per person, and they're paying 45% of their money towards rent. One of the worst cases, I didn't know this is such a weird spot, but Hilton Head, South Carolina, I think they pay about 55, which I don't know what that is exactly about, but because I always thought like Southern states was at least cheaper rent wise. But yeah, I mean, we can't again just move past the housing as a human right thing. That has to be part of the whole package in my mind, because otherwise, again, I really knowing what I know about like small to like large scale landlords, if they hear there's going to be a bonanza of extra money to people, they will just go like that, and it will make it kind of meaningless in the long term, in my mind.
There is one place where rent would go up, and that would be rural communities. A lot of people, and even housing prices in rural communities, because a lot of people in the city would rather live in a place when they're raising a family that has more space. So that is one place that I think most people who are into UBI will acknowledge that rural areas would go up in rent. But yeah, the thing, and we're going to be talking housing next week, and we're going to talk to a guy who talks about communal living. But that's another thing that I think UBI allows is you have three friends that you get along with, and you go buy a big fixer-upper house and you fix it up. And that's other people talk about a concern with UBI is it just inflation, and inflation is two things. One thing I think people don't realize with inflation, it's about the money that's printed. Most UBI is not printing new money. Most people want to do it either in a VAT tax, a land value tax, a combination of a stock, capital gains tax. So it's not new money that would be printed. So, but price inflation probably wouldn't happen because of just quite frankly, as technology gets better, prices drop. And just in competitive markets, it takes one landlord, it takes one restaurant to say, I'm not going to raise my prices as much as everybody else. And they swoop in and get that money. But I mean, rent control, I like the idea in theory. I don't know enough about it. I've heard bad things about some aspects of it. I'm sure it can be curbed and fixed. I'm a very much a YIMBY guy. I think building affordable housing in all sorts of different areas is a must. I look at just different types of houses. I love miniature houses. I love storage crate houses. So I would love to see a lot of I guess dezoning about like in cities too, especially. I know California National Party has something along those lines where we want to force affordable housing in city areas where it's more eco-friendly and easier to do. But yeah, there's a lot to do it. I'm going to say on the social programs, um, there are some plans that want to replace the social safety nets. For instance, Yang's plan though was opt-in, meaning if you got more money from the government, you could still select those. And that's very much, I would say that's the most common, is that you can choose your benefits. I will say the average person who gets like TANF and SNAP gets about like $550. So it would be a $450 increase in their benefits. But yeah, absolutely, people can keep their benefits if they so choose. Most people prefer not having means tested and having the stress of having, being afraid that some government employee or agent is going to be like, I don't like this person. I'm going to deny them the benefits. But those are all, both of you guys have, I think, 100% legitimate, points. I would say one problem I had with Yang's universal basic income is his did not include children. Most universal basic income programs, the idea primarily is to keep it slightly above the poverty line to begin with. Most UBI ideas is to be economically solvable where you don't run a debt with it and then you build it up over time. So like Yang wanted first 4 years to be $1,000, but then he wanted it to go to 2,000 in 2024 if he'd become president. But he did not have one for kids. And most UBIs that I see are $1,000 and then 300 for kids. So yeah, and like I said, there's a lot of different UBIs.
Well, I think one of the things that maybe we should emphasize is the fact that, like, the first thing is that the federal government, with the way it's structured right now, with like the Senate and like our state system, it's going to be this a dead letter kind of thing, because again, there's always going to be this reaction. We can never kind of push these things through. Number one, even like, I shouldn't even say push it through. I should say, like, even to study this issue, to even have any kind of rational kind of like response to the upcoming like automation crisis that's going to happen. We're not seeing that. That's not going to be something that's going to happen from the federal government. We already know that. It's a calcified, stagnated system that is not going to be working for us whatsoever to try to ameliorate what is an obvious concern, and which they should, because again, like the last time society went through a massive change in how they did labor and working conditions was the Industrial Revolution in the UK. And when they were switching over to again more again like from agriculture to again the massive factories, there was multiple issues. One was that the displacement of the working class in such an extent that again unemployment was sky high, crime went through the roof. There was the gin craze because people were upset and bored and pretty much feeling like crap because again they couldn't do anything, so they all started making gin in their backyards or whatever and drinking like crazy, to the point that like it makes like the crack epidemic and like the heroin opioid crisis in this country look like small potatoes. And the only response that the British upper classes had to this massive changeover was pretty much the bloody code, where they would just hang people left and right, or again they got uncomfortable with hanging people left and right for little things, so they started shipping them off to Australia. So again, like the last time was this police state repression to handle this transitional crisis that lasted decades. Obviously, I think human society should move beyond that and not have the kind of like way of just putting the hammer fist down on all these problems. We should have something more humane, and really UBI is the only thing that really kind of makes sure that we're not going to have this massive dislocation of people and communities. Because again, if we're looking towards like a society where like 25% of the jobs are automated and people can't be doing anything, we need to have some kind of like safety net for that, and at least allow them to try different jobs or try to start up like different companies because they have a little bit of an extra to try to make it through. If that's not happening, again, all we're going to be asking for is like more riots, more destruction, more again like possible rise of fascist movements to get back to the good old days. And we're asking for a huge hurricane of trouble, which is going to be definitely happening if we don't have some kind of solution. And I think UBI is not like a panacea, or what is it called? Like it's not cure-all, I guess is the word I'm looking
Absolutely.
for. It's not cure-all for everything, but definitely it's better than just saying like, you know what, we're just going to figure out when it happens, it happens. It's fine.
I think that there's a really interesting point to be made about also when we're talking about automation. I think we need to be also talking about an entire overhaul of how we collect taxes or think about taxes in general. I mean, one, the United States needs a complete overhaul of its taxing system anyways. It's atrocious, and it could be simplified and all these other things. But there's something to be said for every person who gets, the how we rely on taxes right now is, say that you have a factory and you have a person in that factory who makes $50,000, and we tax them on that. And we tax them through a variety of means and state, and we have all these other taxes. But for every person who gets replaced by a robot, it's not like we're just transferring that money over or that taxing over. And so at some point we need to really either through income taxes or really looking at businesses that are making the products, really explore how we're raising funds for our society in general, and then determine what our basic needs are and what we want our basic needs as a society to be, whether that's housing, food, education, healthcare, and starting with these basic principles, and also with the idea that investing in people is investing in our future, is investing in growing our tax base in the future. But I think the UBI is really interesting in the sense of, and there are some interesting examples from around the world. And I actually think during COVID is a perfect opportunity to explore both the benefits of a UBI and the harmful nature of not having a truly socialized system that can handle emergencies and support people in times of great shock. So I think one of the, in the United States, we've spent probably somewhere between $5 and $6 trillion on these emergency bills. And then in addition to that, trillions of dollars lost in economic output, et cetera, when had we just closed the United States for a small period of 2 weeks or something and paid every citizen, we could have actually probably stimulated and generated a lot of jobs just by paying people to stay home. And I think in Canada, so here in Cascadia in Vancouver, a great example is the difference between how Seattle and Washington handled the pandemic and Vancouver and British Columbia handled the pandemic. And in Washington, we're very lucky that we have a very pro-science, forward-thinking, both government and industries that really work to prepare and shut down. And so because of that, we prevented a lot of deaths and we prevented a lot of infections. And but still, by being forced to be a part of the United States with this very hectic response, the fact that 1 year in and we're still dealing with like a 500,000 deaths and still are unsure of how that'll affect us has been very harmful. And if you look at Vancouver, a city at roughly the same size as Seattle, they closed down and they paid people $2,000 a month, but more or less, to stay home for up to 4 months. And because of that, they did a much better job. And their response, I mean, their infection rates and all the rest of it have been so much lower than a city of the same size. So it's not about cities and urban and rural areas. It's really about how we actually respond to these emergencies and what support we do and how we support people during those emergencies.
No,
Well,
absolutely.
that makes sense. Yeah, I mean, like, I think one of the things is that the federal government has no real leadership authority whatsoever anymore. It is not making correct decisions. It is not making anything really happen. It is a gerontocracy on top of an oligarchy, on top of a diseased mess of network interests. And really, at this point, we can't be trusting them to handle anything correctly. I mean, it's just like, we are begging for help, begging for a different life, and we're not seeing that happen. We don't have a chance for any kind of change. We're going down the same stagnant path, and actually it's getting worse because the Democrats give us the status quo, and the Republicans give us, nonsense, craziness on top of conspiracism. And so again, why do we have these two paths? Why do we have this kind of crap incompetence versus maniacs? We shouldn't be doing that. And unfortunately, it seems like a lot of the country in the United States is just fine with that kind of system to a more or less extent. Again, they want to keep us together because of, the flag and memories of previous victories that most of this generation had nothing to do with anyway. And we're just kind of clinging on to this past history, just like every dying empire, I guess, does. And we should be really thinking about trying to change our state of affairs because, again, as human beings, nothing really is eternal. We can always change. We can always, get different. We can always do something in a way that, would be shocking to our ancestors to a certain extent. And I think we should actually really try to embrace that. And we're not seeing that. We're not seeing that with the federal government. We're not seeing that with the two-party system. And I just think that, it's kind of the point where I don't want to cut ties with the rest of the country because, again, I feel like everyday Americans have more in common than ever, but I think that if you can't really understand that your political system is outdated, wrong constantly, and frankly sort of murderous, why do we have to keep continuing with this? There's no point for that. That we have ability to change. And I think having a West Coast that is, independent and actually can address these issues in a timely manner with a semblance of rationality and morality can happen. As obviously we can see from across the world, like again, you said like Vancouver, again, the rates are so down. Well, again, why couldn't we do that? Well, it's because we had, for some reason, because of electoral college system, invited a celebrity, apprentice TV show master to come over and, play with us and like, just, have this long bullshit soap opera for 4 years. Excuse my language.
So a couple points from what you guys were saying, Brandon. One of the horrible daydreams us Yang Gangers have is if COVID had happened 2 months earlier. The thought being that everyone would be like, oh my gosh, there is a need for a universal basic income or direct cash relief. In fact, it's now 78% of Democrats support it. I think before it was at like 55. And now I think it's like 60% of Republicans support universal basic income. And that's, some of that is for right now, and then some of it is just in perpetuity. But, COVID has been a good test run for automation. Like, this is what automation is going to look like when it comes to the job market. It's going to be like this, where every truck driver is out of a job, every call center worker is out of a job, clerical lawyers are out of a job. It's going to be all of them at once. One point you brought up earlier, Forbes, that I think was interesting, and it's ironic. And forgive in 3, 2, 1, here comes snooty elitist coastal talk. When it comes to the economy in America, it's Seattle, the Bay Area, Los Angeles, New York, DC, Boston, Chicago, and the Triangle in Texas. Those are really the places that matter when it comes to economics. Like, that's where people are buying. That's what other countries are interested in, or those areas. So universal basic income, to me, was a real boon to the rural areas of America, because for many reasons, if you live in a town with 2,000 people, it may not be a good idea to open up a hamburger stand or a steamed hamburger place. But if every person in that town has an extra $1,000 a month, well, oh my gosh, maybe it's okay to start a business. And even along those lines, if your business fails, you still have that safety net. So one of the things I absolutely love about universal basic income is the potential for small businesses in small Main Street towns. And the other thing along those lines, like musicians, imagine if you're like a 20-something musician, you got a band, and it's your dream, you want to try to make this band work. Well, you and your bandmates can pool your universal basic income money together and go hit the road. And I'm a firm believer that art is very important for a society, even beyond just the cultural aspects, the economy. I believe most science and most innovation is inspired by art. I think that's historically accurate. What else was I going to say along those lines? But yeah, it would be funny. It would be Republicans who would vote against the universal basic income and some conservative Democrats. And the irony being, it would really help out their communities more than anything.
Well, it gets the money circulating. I mean, like, that's the biggest problem. It's just that, we've been in this like supply side trip for, 4 decades now. And again, at a certain point, it's just like, the rich really just like will suck up so much and then put into the Caymans and then put into like these other like, places like Panama. And then it doesn't circulate. It's not a healthy system. It's creating these big clots in like some other end. And we're not seeing like any kind of like growth. We're seeing stagnation or degradation in most of the country. And when you're talking about like the arts and things like that and growth, I mean, like, if someone has a little extra boost, they might actually take a chance on like a new idea that they've been percolating. I forget who it was, but there was someone who said that I don't really care about the contours of like Albert Einstein's brain. I care about how many people who were like Einstein who died in the field somewhere because they're a slave. There's something along those lines. And it's just like, yeah, we're missing out a lot of like growth for humanity. And the only reason why we have chosen more or less through revolution and change over the centuries, the capitalist system was because compared to the past of like feudalism and like the big slave empires, It was like, another stage of human development where we're kind of growing towards like something better. Again, I'm not saying capitalism was all that great. I don't believe that whatsoever, but it's obvious in comparison to past stages of history. Yes, it is. That being said, I think now we're getting beyond capitalism. We are actually outgrowing it. And so we can actually get to a new stage of like human development. And that's being held back because with capitalism, again, it's kind of redundant to say, but it's a system that, a lot of people with a lot of money want to keep their money at all times, and they're not interested in any kind of change. Just like the kings and emperors of old weren't really interested in any kind of change in how they ruled things. So again, we're supposed to be getting to this point. I mean, like, humanity's supposed to get better, not worse. We're not supposed to go into the abyss, and most of the time, again, I really do trust humanity. It takes a long time, but most of the time it always is going forward, not backwards.
Interesting quote. You guys aware of the comedian Doug Stanhope? That name ring a bell? Very funny man.
Yeah, I know Doug Stanhope. Yeah, he's a Joe Rogan fan, or Joe Rogan friend, I should say.
Yeah, they did the Man Show together. He's a very good comedian. He said, in regards to universal basic income and automation, isn't the goal of humanity to have 100% unemployment? And I was like, well, imagine a world where robots grow our food, and we can pursue art and philosophy and look to the stars.
Well, I mean, it's kind of like that's the implicit. I mean, if we really want to get our nerd on for a second here, that's the implicit idea of Star Trek. Star Trek was basically like we already fixed everything on Earth, especially in the original show where you had like, you know, you had an alien as a first officer. No one minded that. You had a Russian guy and a Japanese guy in the middle of the 60s, which is like 20 years after World War II, plus in the middle of the Cold War, all working together. You had a Scotsman, again from Scotsman from Scotland. That's painfully redundant. And then Uhura was again like a black woman communications officer who was completely respected. And again, that showcased the future. And they were doing their explorations and adventures because there was not a profit incentive. Everyone had plenty. There was no reason. They just wanted to grow humanity and grow consciousness and change and help the universe. And I thought that, again, it's a very romantic idea, but again, we will possibly get to a point of post scarcity. So why wouldn't that be the case? However, the one thing I would just say though is that again, you have conservatives and libertarians for the most part who are not as smart as a Milton Friedman, who will complain and say that, well, this is going to de-incentivize work. That people just sit their ass and then they're just not going to do anything.
I also think it's okay if it de-incentivizes work. I think everything that you were just saying, I think that I think giving access to education, access to all of these things for those who want it, and those who will work and want to work will work. But also I think we need to get away from stigmatizing or this idea that everything revolves around humans as economic units. I think in my view, whether it's capitalism, socialism, communism, or any ism, a lot of these economic philosophies from the 20th century, my biggest problem with them is that they treat humans as economic units, and that also they remove humans from their places, from their settings, and I think that there's an important factor in all of that too, that nature is this invisible hand of the market that you can't just remove humans from it and expect things to go okay. What we're seeing today is the result of removing humans from their natural surroundings and their environment. And I think as long as we continue to do it, we'll have this kind of global collapse and pollution run rampant. I'm curious of, when we talk about housing as a human right, healthcare as a human right, do you see any problem with connecting human rights and to dollars? That basically a UBI, what we're doing with it is we're connecting everything with money and we're assigning a dollar value to everything. Is there any type of problem that you see with that, or do you think that that's an all right thing to do?
Sorry, go ahead, Bill.
I was gonna, along those lines, I've said this before, I think to Forbes, but the only thing the American government is good at is sending out checks. So I think that helps.
Are they good at that? Compared
to everything else they do, comparatively. The The other thing I think I like
It's a
the
low
idea of
bar.
universal basic income is it gives people flexibility. Like a person who has food stamps and other benefits, they might have enough food for the time, but they have an electric bill that needs to be paid. So I like the flexibility that UBI gives a person, but I do agree that removing people and the economy, like economic worth and a person's worth, should be two different things. And I think, and to quote Milton Friedman, you can't have a trickle down economy unless you have an incredibly robust social safety net or foundation. And that's what we don't have with trickle down economics. If every American, what's the average American's worth? I think like $28,000 a year individual. I forget the exact number.
I think it's like, I forget too, but I think it's like it's between like either 28 to 32, something like that.
Imagine if everyone's average, say the average was 75,000, where everyone had the access to healthcare, to great education, and they had means to survive and even more beyond survive. Like I think people, the American dream isn't to be drinking Cristal and having a Rolls Royce or living in a mega mansion. It's economic security, knowing that your kids are going to be better off than you, and maybe a vacation to a national park or to Disney once a year. I think people realistically,
Yeah.
their American dream is not extravagance. And I also think too, with people like Musk and all these people, I don't think they're really driven by money. I think money is the engine that, like, it's part of it, but it's about having that big business and the control, and it's more than just money. It's power in a sense.
I mean, like, there's a people, when, it was really funny. I had this, kind of one of these stupid ass, Facebook arguments with a certain person. And, they were saying like, well, you wouldn't know what would happen with UPI because you have, generations of people on a sort of welfare and they wouldn't do anything. And I pointed out that like, I know people and I know multiple examples, again, statistically slash anecdotally, where they come from money. They actually do come from inherited wealth. They really don't have to do too much. And I can think of like a couple cases where, a certain person could just, be at home, family doesn't care. Other certain person wants to go down in the world and actually like develop their career. They always know they have that safety net, right? And so even with like these huge, personal family safety nets, they still want to do stuff most of the time. You really don't have so many of like, I mean, yeah, you get every once in a while, like again, these JOs who are like, really just like sitting around, like not doing anything. But for the most part, that's not like all of humanity. All of humanity is not that negative. It's not like all of a sudden, like you get a free check and it's just like, oh boy, well, I got like $1,000. Like I'm just going to sit here and do nothing and smoke my weed and just, stare at, Rick and Morty all day. It's like again, like I always thought to myself, like if I won the lottery tomorrow, what would I do? It's just like I'm not going to be sitting around in my pool all day, just staring off into nothing. I would really want to pursue more of writing, which is again my passion. Like I would just keep doing that. And there's a lot of other people who just I know another person who comes from a family of wealth, but he loves working at his newspaper. That again, like he's not the owner, but again, like he could almost be the owner because he has the means. He just loves doing newspaper stuff. He loves that part of it. There's always again that kind of productive, and if you're thinking also too that like the people who would normally be working in like a Burger King, McDonald's, or possibly in like the fields of like California, gathering our almonds and like soybeans or whatever. Um, if they had the UBI thing, they probably would be saving up money to better themselves and actually try to raise their kids out of poverty. And then also too, I mean, that would have to be coupled with the fact that maybe the other big caveat I have that I haven't mentioned besides the rent thing is that you do need to have a universal healthcare system because otherwise, again, too, you can have UBI all you want, but if you're going to go bankrupt the moment you have a sneeze, like it doesn't really matter.
Absolutely. I'm going to say something controversial. I'm sure some people will be
Is it?
outraged at. Forgive me.
Is this the cancel Dick Tracy thing? We're not doing that.
Along those lines,
Oh boy.
do you know how much it costs to keep a person incarcerated in California in a year?
I know it's ridiculous.
$40,000. Most of those crimes, let's be honest, are drug dealers. They are drug dealers on the corner. Check out The Wire, even though it's in Baltimore, it could just as easily be in California. Those people do not make a lot of money that people think. Like I bet you could lower crime by paying that person who's dropped out of school, who doesn't have a lot of opportunities. You could save so much money. You'd save $14,000 a person to pay a person to stay at home and not commit crime than you would sending them to prison. You're not even including police work. You're not all these other things and these trickle down effects of crime. You know, when people talk about crime, there is a generation that, job training is terrible in this country, where a lot of people, it's very hard for them to find their way back into society. So they go right back in jail, or, they're 16 or 18 and they're committing crime because drug dealing to them or whatever crime is the best economic option they have in reality. So I would rather save $14,000 at the bare minimum and have them not commit crime than to house a person and have generational, problems. You have those people who can stay home, then they're going to find things to do. They're going to find a small business that they can run. They're going to find their way if they have that. And then you can focus on other generations of kids. You build up the education, you have more stay-at-home parents. I see one of the aspects of universal basic income or negative income tax is the ability to dramatically reduce crime in America.
So I'm just curious in California, and I think we should have a whole episode. I think public health and drug use and crime would make an entire episode on its own. I think there's a lot of different areas that, so I'm curious, California, is marijuana legal or illegal?
It's legal.
Yeah, recreational is legal, yeah.
But still so you're talking about, but are there still a lot of people in jail for it? I know that California has your 3 strikes policy and all the rest of that.
It's still there. Some of
I
them
don't remember amnesty or anything like that happening or anything yet.
No, it hasn't. And I'm not even, I mean, marijuana laws are ridiculous, but I'm even talking like heroin, crystal meth.
Well, it's funny. So there's a really good example, and you know that Oregon has decriminalized all drugs recently. So that's I think Cascadian tends to be pretty forward thinking. And also Vancouver has been running the Insight program, I think for 12 to 13 years, but it's a fantastic program which legally lets people use heroin, under doctor supervision. And the whole idea, behind it, and I think in Seattle, we have a strong tradition of pure run needle exchanges. And the whole idea is that you keep people healthy, safe, alive, and that for every, even just prevention of disease, for every case of HIV, that you prevent, for every case of Hep C that you prevent, you're saving taxpayers hundreds of thousands of dollars, and you're keeping people safe and healthy until they might decide to get clean. But I think in Australia in the 80s, there was a really interesting example where, with the AIDS epidemic kind of up and coming, that they had the option to follow U.S. Health policy in kind of criminalizing drug use, criminalizing a lot of access to clean needles. And they took a hard left on it, basically, and they brought together coalitions of police and drug users and other people and just really looked at what they could do. And one of the main things they did was take it away from the Department of Justice and put it under the Department of Health. And so they took it, and rather than criminalize it, they treated it like a health problem, that drug use was a health problem, not a criminal one. And by doing that, you completely change the framework of it, because now the goal is to help someone get well, not to punish them for the crime. And I think that that's a huge and a whole different element. And it does. It saves hundreds of thousands of dollars. It saves millions of dollars, billions of dollars. And you keep people, I don't know, as members of society. I think one of the biggest things that when you go to jail, what you're talking about with the recidivism and all the rest of it is you are disconnecting people from their ability to have social structures, to receive federal benefits, because they lose access to those federal programs, right? They lose access to SNAP, they lose access to healthcare, to worker retraining and all the rest of it. And we should be providing those, in spades. And so I think anything that we can do to help strengthen our communities rather than tear them down will be a benefit in the end.
And
yeah, absolutely.
Along those lines with like inner city rejuvenation, I've always thought, small businesses, putting businesses in, at-risk communities is a great way to reduce crime and to make a community and raise the property value. When you're giving people money, you're saying you matter. You're part of this community. We're all in this together. Once you see those small businesses pop up in places, it's amazing to see the positive results. On the drug note, I promise you this, because I'm a full supporter of using psychedelics to help people with drugs and depression. When we do that episode, I will be shrooming my balls. That is my promise to you guys. It'll be fun. I'll probably be like, oh.
No, it's not gonna be fun, Brandon. It'll be a very ugly experience. I've been through this before. We had an episode in Free the Bear, and like he did that on shrooms, and it was never produced. It was
Sort of the lost
noises, and he was kind of clawing at his face for a while. We couldn't do it like another podcast for 2 weeks.
Batman.
Like this, like it's weird.
Before we plug our local business of the week, I'll ask you guys, final question. What would you guys do if you were given an extra guaranteed $1,000 a month?
2 chicks at the same time.
All right.
Actually, if I was given an extra $1,000 a month, I probably would be saving it so that actually I could be putting that into a personal project I want to do for a long time, which is kind of like another short film. So I would be doing that. If not that, actually, if I had the extra 1,000, I would probably also. I do have an idea for actually, like, I want to work with a friend on actually doing like a kind of small micro distillery kind of thing. Because again, like, I do like my bourbons and things like that. So like, I think that would be what I would do to kind of play with that idea and see how that would come about. So that would be at least a couple of them. I mean, and also this, oh boy, I might actually go take a little vacation in San Francisco and reinvest it into the community. That'd be terrible, right? Go to a small restaurant and actually kind of splurge a little bit, boy, that money would go nowhere. Not just to the waiters, the chef, the owner, etc.
So I do run a small business. So I run Horizon Used Books here in Seattle. We're actually one of the oldest, longest, continually running used bookstores in the city. And I think, $1,000 a month would be great. It'd be gone in a second. But it would be useful in either helping pay rent or to help bring on another worker doing something else. So it would certainly be helpful. I don't think it would alleviate too much. But like you said, I think in terms of creating that economic mobility and keeping the cash in the system, I think what's nice about this idea of the UBI is it serves that purpose. That I think $1,000 is enough, that it can be helpful. It's not going to be life-changing, but it could be for a lot of people too. I look at how many people are below the poverty line, and then how many children across the United States are below the poverty line. And I think it's criminal, and I know here in Seattle, the amount of people, that are sleeping out on the streets are in the thousands. And so giving someone $2,000 a month is enough for rent. That is enough for a home. It's enough for a hotel. It's enough for a motel if it was really needed. It's enough for a tent and a campground, if nothing else. But it's money that could help people survive, and so I think that would be a very positive thing.
I'd do 3 things. Some of it would go to mortgage. Some would go to my kids, like in after-school programs, or just to make their lives better. My wife, I always talk about, we'd either buy an RV, save up for an RV, or make it a commitment to go to a national park for a vacation every year. I'd do it right. Like, go somewhere where it will enrich my kids' lives, where they get to see nature or something like that. So it would go towards an educational vacation for my kids. So that's my wife and I, working on the Yang campaign, that question comes up a lot in the casual conversation. So we always talk like what we do our 1,000 with. So yeah, that's what we would do.
Can we say, like, again, all these ideas, like, again, like for my flip into like, a little bit more serious, like we're talking about, like what Brandon brought up, no matter what, it is going back into the system of the economy. It is, again, a mobile thing. It's going around. It's actually, again, like, it's going to be spreading the wealth around a bit more, and it's going to be helping a lot more people. The problem with, the United States and, like, the UK to a certain extent has been stuck in this 1980s mindset of cut taxes, cut taxes, cut taxes, have, these budgets get blown out of proportion. All of a sudden, we should be servicing all this money to debt because we cut taxes. The money isn't really flowing. It's not going around. And let's be honest, like, if I have $1,000 and I'm going to be, doing something with it, it's probably going to just like trickle back up, to a certain extent. Like if I'm buying like products for like to do a short film and I'm doing that on Amazon, who gets that in the end? It's probably going to be Bezos, right? So again, like it's not like really disappearing out of the system. It's not like I'm just like, I'm not taking like $1,000 and then like burying it in like Joshua Tree. So like there's going to be that kind of mobility, and like that really makes for a more functioning economy. Again, economics is the one of the basic tenets is supply and demand, right? We don't have it. The demand side is ignored constantly. We're not able to really like have that part of the equation really mentioned or adjusted for. Most of the time we're just we're throwing in the tax cuts, we're doing this, and then it goes into maybe 2 yachts, which again it's not a big industry, and then it goes into the Caymans and sits there in an account somewhere.
It
And that's
just collects
and
money.
just collects, yeah, and then a bank gets interest off of it. And that's again, we're talking about small sectors. We're not talking about the large sectors, like again, like like stores, restaurants, or anything else that is small business wise, which is mostly like the majority of like employers are.
I think it's also really important to look at. I think what I would be most interested in looking at here too would be sectors of how this would affect life for some pretty like marginalized communities, but also in effect of things like human trafficking, which are incredibly serious issues in this country. And I think what you brought up also with migrant workers is really important. So basically, we have these sectors of the American population that, because they lack citizenship or the ability to get out of certain positions, that they become very stuck in very exploitative situations. And I think with migrant workers not having access to basic rights, who might be in fear of their livelihoods in terms of ICE raids or other things, so they're kept in very bad conditions, or people hold on to their passports, and so they don't have the ability to leave those. So giving access, so I'd be very interested to see how that could give access to people in those situations. And then just, in terms of other things of even, we talked about stigmatization of drug users, and I think the same is very impacted for sex workers in terms of them not having the ability, if there's abuse happening, to go to the police and file charges or things like that. And then I think also for homeless populations. And that's not to mention, communities that are hardest hit by gentrification, traditionally Black communities, traditionally Asian or Latino communities that could really be benefiting. And I think it also still has to go hand in hand with a lot of what we're talking about. I think an interesting conversation at some point could be around community banking and the ability of publicly owned banks to invest into communities with granting programs. And there's a lot that can be done around encouraging, if you want to talk about small businesses or local businesses, of how communities can support local businesses through granting projects and programs, through zero interest loans, through all sorts of different ways that we can be encouraging this like revitalization effort. And I think one of the biggest harms that has come from COVID has been harm against independent businesses that have had to compete, where they might have had to have shuttered their doors, but the big businesses stay open. The Fred Meyers or the Walmarts or the whatever have been able to be open during the entirety of this time. And then obviously the people who've really benefited have been the Amazons and online service providers that have been able to rake in record amounts of money. Well, I think something like more than half of small businesses in America have closed in the last year. I mean, it's a fundamental transference of wealth that we are seeing happening right now from the lowest margins to the top margins. And social programs and taxes have always been designed to reallocate that wealth to continue to make sure that it flows and that it doesn't go to just the 0.1% that are just massively reaping the benefits, in an equitable way. And so finding those ways to redistribute that in a healthy manner, I think, is really important.
But that's an important point. Like the one thing I just would just as a real quick, extra added part is that the Native American communities in Canada and like the United States are very marginalized and very much in like horrendous third world poverty on a scale that I don't think most of the citizens of both countries understand. And when you have like, I think the Navajo Nation only like, I think 40% of them do not have electricity. Like $1,000 could actually help ameliorate that situation. They could actually pull resources to actually again like get the wells, which again most places there don't have running water. A lot of those places do not have electricity. So again, like that can actually kind of help. Again, like their nation could actually have a program to actually pull those resources to actually get that, which is something they've been desperate for years, but between indifference and corruption have not been able to.
Oh, and I was gonna add on California National Party. We on our platform we support a Bank of California to do all those things that you were talking about. And I'll give another shout out to Andrew Yang Gang. He's running for mayor, and that is his major policy is not UBI actually. It's creating a Bank of New York that would be there as a nonprofit to just give out loans. So I think it's a very important progressive idea. A final statistic on UBI, according to the Roosevelt Institute, it would increase the American economy by $2 trillion and create 4.5 million new jobs. And that's mostly in small businesses, which are going to be less likely to be automated. And so it would be a real boost. The other thing with UBI, another stat, America right now is at an all-time low about people moving state to state, which is actually a really good barometer and way to tell if economy is thriving, if people are moving from state to state to find different jobs. And we're at an all-time low. So that would be another thing that would be increased with universal basic income. I would advise anyone, if they are curious about UBI, there's a man named Scott Santens. He's been like the unofficial UBI guy in America for probably 10 years now. On Medium, he has probably like 50 articles about UBI addressing any concern or any report he writes about it. He's super interesting. Great episode. Well, I guess I'll start with Brandon, since you were last week. Do you have a Cascadia product or a business that you would like to promote?
I think I'm going to leave it to both of you this week. I'll be excited to hear what you have to recommend.
Fair enough. Forbes?
Well, I think, because me and my father was fully vaccinated. He was of age to actually get vaccinated. We're planning the first vacation for both of us in the longest of times. My mother passed away from cancer back in November 2019. And so we haven't had a chance to kind of like, hook up together. And we're going to go to Solvang. We're going to do our little sideways trip, if you guys know that movie, which is one of our favorites. And there is a Rideau winery in there. I think I'm saying right, Rideau. And
Rideau. You're good.
Yeah, and it's a great place. Again, it was owned by a woman from New Orleans. Great food, really really well done wines of like Syrah and again like Cabernets, and it's a fantastic little spot. Again, it's one of these things that's so uniquely Californian that again like 2 hours away we can have like this nice little like French style vineyard to kind of go hang out at. So that's kind of fun. And I think there's one other little product again, like, and I know I'm always, liquor heavy, but, I would just say, San Francisco is the home of Anchor Steam beer, and that's one of the fantastic ones, and particularly the California Lager I love.
All right. I am going to promote my favorite restaurant in the entire world. It's in Placerville, California. Very small town, I think less than 10,000 people, on Highway 50 on the way to South Lake Tahoe. At the base. It's called Timmy's Brown Bag. And anyone listening, go to his website just to see the different sandwiches. So this guy was an engineer. He had a midlife crisis. I'm going to become a chef. He went and worked at all sorts of places in Yountville, which is Napa, the restaurant capital. He worked at Michael Chiarello's restaurant. He said, I want to open my own place. So he opened up a sandwich shop in Placerville, 200 square feet. Actually less than 200. I think it's like 196 square feet. Sandwiches are $10. I'm going to just give you an example of one of them. Well, I'll say this. He sometimes puts in sandwiches like Pop Rocks, Bobas. He puts the weirdest concoctions, and these sandwiches are all amazing. But here's one. It's enchiladas Suiza sandwich with pork verde and Swiss cheese. It's pork and salsa verde, Swiss cheese, salsa aguacate. I don't even know what that means. Grilled corn tortilla pieces, carrots in escabeche, which I believe is a little sauce, and romaine on a ciabatta bread. But he does like these just bizarre sandwiches. And he was also one of the first people in the Sacramento area to be all about farm to table, which is probably one of the more proud things I am now being in California, that we were the ground zero of farm to table, which I'm sure we'll eventually talk and do a whole episode on that, because that's actually very important for the economy. So, Brandon, Cascadia Underground, if people Google that, they'll find you. Oh, he's on mute, but yes, Forbes, Medium, last exit on the left.
Yep, last exit on the left. You're going to see some previous stuff from us from Free the Bear, and also going to be uploading episodes too, and any other kind of articles that we kind of throw it that way.
Excellent. And then I will say California National Party, vote_CNP on Twitter. And yeah, see you guys next week. We'll talk some housing. All right. All right, Seacrest out.